I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with Eli Horowitz, and welcome to the WNBA Insider Podcast, a 6-week deep dive into each WNBA team. This week, we got the LA Sparks and the Chicago Sky. First, for a quick free agency update, the Liberty makes some moves and are basically the same team with a new coach. Minnesota Lynx also make a few signings, but are still in need of a guard. The Connecticut Suns players have continued to grow overseas, so you got to be excited about that. Looking forward to the next season. Now let's dive in. The Chicago Sky are our first team we're going to cover. Eli, tape on the style. Like we're talking about tape. We're talking about how they run the X's and O's. We've talked about this a lot about different teams and how that's what we want this podcast to be. What have you been looking at kind of as you dove into the Sky? What was the first thing you kind of noticed and stuck out to you?
So I watched a good amount of clips on both ends of the ball. And what stuck out to me is, I got to say, I was really impressed just overall with Amber Stocks and the X's and O's and schemes that I'm seeing. Defensively, I really like how they guarded the pick and roll. Offensively, I like their transition game. I like the actions they use to get Quigley open for threes. I like how they get Vandersloot space to operate and make plays. So my macro take is there's a lot to be excited about, and I think Amber Stocks can really grow into being a great WNBA head coach. However, they do have a lot of personnel weaknesses in terms of individual defense. Offensively in the half court, they really struggled, and I think a lot of that has to do with just not having certain personnel. And so I think that's going to be a big thing to really dive into on this podcast is what's their identity and what's their direction in terms of roster construction? I feel like that's the big question. And frankly, it has been for a few years now with just so much turnover on the roster, players demanding trades. They just really haven't had an identity from a roster standpoint. And I'm excited to talk to you and kind of get your take on that as well.
So it's something very interesting. You know, I've spoken to some players, I've spoken to some WNBA minds, and one of the things that we discussed at the beginning of last season or in the offseason leading into last season was Amber Stocks wanted to run a very fast-paced offense, a transition offense. And in some ways, the Chicago Sky excelled in that last year. That's definitely something that Sky fans can look at and say, hey, this is a positive that we can build on for last year. I think you pointed out the stat to me while we were chatting. They're like number one or number two in transition ball, and up there with, you know, our other team of this podcast, the LA Sparks. But that's just a very positive thing for the team. But something that builds off of the lack of identity is, you know, you have someone like Steph Dolson who's not a court, like she's not pushing the ball up the court. She's not going to be running both sides of the court. And I think that they knew that was going to be their type of ball. But I think when you see some of the roster moves that they've done, it kind of leaves you questioning a few things.
I'm trying to figure out how Stephanie Dolson and now Elena Coates truly fit into their identity. Now, Dolson is a good three-point shooter. She's really good on the pick and pop. She's really good at posting up. So I think she does enough things really well that Chicago can push the ball with Vandersloot and Quigley. And in addition, Kalea Copper is an exciting young guard. Faulkner, if she's back. So they have, and then they're going to add another guard in the draft most likely. So they're going to have a really explosive backcourt team that can push the ball, shoot, get up and down. Now, Dolson might not be the ideal big to run up and down with them, but I think because she can hit the three, because she's savvy defensively, and because she provides them another element in terms of posting up when they need some half-court offense, I think they can make it work with her. But Coates is what really I just can't envision it unless they just really change their half-court identity to throw the ball into the post. And maybe it's good to have that kind of duplicity and ability to do that. But I don't know. What do you think? Does that just completely alter their identity, or is there a world in which they can throw the ball into Dolson and Coates in the low post more and and just have the other players spot up. I mean, they do have good shooters, so in theory, if those players command a double team, they should get some open looks.
Well, I think it's really interesting. A lot of times when you think about, and this kind of just popped into my head while we were chatting, a lot of times when you think about a high pace offense, someone who's going to push the ball up the court and play this transition ball that they want to play, you often don't think of Dolson as being that stereotypical form for that position. But something very interesting is because she has that pick and pop shot that's so quick. Like, she has other aspects of her game that are very quick that often make it so that she is able to play that style of offense, which is great for how she's been able to fit into the sky. And we saw that last year. I think it's interesting that you have a lot of players on this roster that can shoot and a lot of players that can feed the ball. Dolson can feed the ball. Quigley and Sloot can feed the ball. I mean, even Cappy, and we'll get to Cappy later, last year before she had her concussion, I mean, she was leading the league in assists, which goes really underrated early on in the season when this team was struggling and had a lot of players playing overseas with overseas commitments. I would like them to kind of decide. This isn't a sport like football where they, every time they're coming down the court on like on offense, that they can say, okay, this time Dolson go down low, this time, up top. Because I feel like the problem with her is if you keep her down low the whole game, then you're missing out on her explosiveness from beyond the arc. But if you keep her beyond the arc the whole game, you're losing out on offensive rebounds, which is something that to win games against top tier teams, you need offensive rebounds. We saw that in the finals. We saw that time and time again.
Yeah, and that's, I think this season's just going to be fascinating in terms of what does Amber Stocks do on offense? Does she throw out Dolson and Coates together and say, we're going to just pound the ball inside, play a high-low game? Coates is very familiar doing that at South Carolina alongside Asia Wilson, and Stephanie Dolson did that alongside Breanna Stewart. I think the difference is, though, think about it. Coates played with Wilson, who's a more athletic, stretchier big, right? And Dolson played with Breanna Stewart, who's also a stretchy big and more mobile. Now you'd have two bigs that I think they just, in my opinion, are not an ideal pairing, especially for a team that guards fit a more running perimeter style. So I actually think they need to stagger them and bring Coates off the bench. But then it's like Coates was the number 2 pick in the draft, and you're really going to draft someone number 2 and have them be a bench player? So I almost have more questions than answers, honestly, after diving into the film.
Well, I mean, I know you got a lot more questions, but something that I want to pose to you is, I mean, her rookie season's a wash. So we can basically look at it as Chicago having, in so many ways, 3 top 5 picks in this draft. If you like, that's not like the craziest way to look at something. So if we're looking at it like that, to have, 2 of those picks get you like, if all 3 of those picks are going to move your team in a positive direction, the direction that you want, to me, it doesn't matter if Coates comes off the bench and then they get, 2 more players. One of them comes off the bench. Also, one of them's a starter in this draft. Because to me, I'm looking at the top teams in the league, the Lynx, the Sparks, and Connecticut. Those teams have talent on the bench that could start if need be. But they choose, and a lot of talk about what Atlanta's going to do coming this season is picking a lineup, because you have more than 5 players that can start, picking a lineup that gives you the best chance. And sometimes that means, your 3rd or your 4th best player, or your 5th best player isn't starting and is going to come off the bench in a second lineup and is still going to get minutes with the starters, but is just more beneficial for the team.
Let me ask you this. From what you've seen on Coates, do you project her to be an all-star level starter, or do you think she might top out at maybe someone like a Jantel Lavender, who's a good role player, but kind of a second unit center with some upside?
In all honesty, I see her in between those two. I could see her getting, an all-star nod. Look, I'm looking at her at, let's say she has a 10 season career. Okay. if she's doing that, I could see her getting a couple all-star nods. I don't see her, putting up fights for MVP or like most rebounds in a season, but I think she could definitely be a clog in a wheel that wins championships if she plays to her potential.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I watched a lot of film this morning on her at South Carolina, and it's just hard to tell because she dominated against, college centers, and that doesn't really, it may translate to the next level, but frankly, it's hard to tell because the center she's going up against, like you said, it's not Brittany Griner, it's not Sylvia Fowles. So we'll have to see. I don't know. I just felt a lot of her moves were she was so much bigger than the player. She just kind of lunged at them and drew a foul or made a layup. And that's not going to work against the elite defensive centers in the W. So I think we just kind of have to see how she does against pros. And also she's just now getting a short stint overseas. So we don't even know how we don't have a sample size to even say in Europe how she's doing against professional athletes.
That's very true. And I think that can't be stated enough because, before when she was drafted, there was some hope she was going to get in last season. That didn't happen. But I think there was still a lot of question marks because she wasn't, and hopefully this is a chip on her shoulder that she uses, but there was a lot of question marks because of her injury causing her to be out during the run for the championship. You didn't get a chance to see her in prime time, in big games. I mean, we saw that during the season before she got injured, but we didn't see her go against like the top talent that she's going to be facing, in the NCAA tournament. So I think that puts even more question marks in your head. Like the other players from South Carolina that went pro, I think you had this, okay, yeah, they did really good in college. How are they going to do here? But that they have that big play capability because they performed on the biggest stage in their respective league. You don't have that with her, which I think just adds more questions to our minds. And considering that she was such a high pick, and there was some top talent that went from the draft last year. So you really put a lot of eggs in that basket.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to Chicago overall from the tape, like I said, they were 7th in offense last year, but 2nd in transition. So they're really good pushing the ball. Vandersloot has incredible court vision. Quigley can knock down shots. Dolson can knock down shots. Now they're going to have a much different roster this year because they won't have Breland. They won't have Young. They don't have, Imani Boyette, who they had at the beginning of last year. We don't know if they'll have Cappy. But they have Jordan Hopper. Is it Hooper or Hopper? She's another one that can knock down shots.
Hooper.
She can knock down shots, and they're gonna, So I guess in summation, given that pushing the ball in transition and spreading the floor is kind of their strength, I don't see how Dolson and Coates can really play together while simultaneously maximizing Vandersloot and Quigley and the pace they want to use, even if they have Faulkner and Kalea Copper. I just don't see it.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of Copper. I think this team is underratedly stacked at the guard position and has a lot of upside that we're going to see big stuff come from them. But I think the question truly has to be, can they create a paint presence? They had Jessica Breland last year, but the problem last year was kind of in the Breland Boyette issue was you had one player who was able to run the court much better in Breland, but didn't have that same intensity and skill on defense that Boyette has. So if I'm Chicago, I'm looking at this, all right, we got 2 picks in the draft. We got a young player who's coming off fresh. I'm sure they have their own vision of what Coates is going to do. But the real question moving forward is, what are we doing with these draft picks? What can we get, or what can we do in this offseason so when we start the season next year, our team is much more of the style of play that we wanted? And something that I've always questioned with Amber Stocks is, it seems to me that you are not giving yourself the personnel for the type of game that you want to play.
Well, that's the interesting thing because Amber Stocks is also the GM. So she has, two top 4 picks. So to some extent, and I actually wrote a piece for Excel Sports last year on the coach GM role, and Michael Alter, the owner of the Sky, he said on the record, like, one of the reasons he's always, because he also had Pokey as coach last GM, and he wants the coach to also have the accountability of, I pick the players and coach the players, so that there can't be this finger pointing of the GM didn't get the right personnel. Like, Amber Stocks is going to have 2 picks, and on a basketball team, that's 40% potentially of your starting lineup. Like, she's going to get to kind of decide right now. Like, are they going to double down on their guard play and try to get more athletic and versatile and really run the floor, or are they going to try to add size and try to get more of players that can really operate in a half court? And I hope it's the former, personally.
Well, jumping into the X's and O's, I know you remarked to me a few times that their half-court game just confused you.
Well, it's not like I said, the X's and O's actually impressed me. I liked a lot of the actions. They ran some really good flare action with Dolson to get Allie Quigley open for 3. I like a lot of their side pick and roll actions. So what I'm confused more about is, like I said, personnel, right? Like, they were 9th in half-court offense, and I don't think it was a coaching issue. I just think that when the game slows down and Vandersloot isn't able to push the ball as much, what are they trying to do in the half-court? We know they can shoot it, but if you're cold, you need other things to go to. And so that's where it gets back to what you said of, like, should Dolson be posting up more? Because Dolson is such a good screener. They often use her on the perimeter, not just in the pick and roll, and to screen to get Quigley open. And then it's hard for her to then, in a short shot clock situation, to then run down and get good post position.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the team has to kind of decide at a certain point, and I touched on this earlier, are they going to do an in and out where they're just going to kick it down low to some of their bigs and poke it back out, which I think Dolson to some extent has the ability to do. But Dolson doesn't have the speed to be going from the top of the court to down low on the paint to be making plays all the time. Like, that's just not a possibility. And you really, again, need to decide how you're going to use her. And when I was looking at the tape, something that I noticed is, they're using her to get a lot of motion and free up other players on the backcourt, but nobody's down low for the rebounds. No, and again, offensive rebounds make championships.
I mean, I think she also could operate really well out of the elbow area. Like, Stephanie Dolson is a great passer. That's something I saw in the film.
Yeah.
In a way that maybe it's not a pretty answer, but as a coach myself, maybe this team really just has to have 2 different identities in the half court and in transition. And it makes it more complicated, especially with a young head coach. But maybe they can really run some high-low actions with Coates. There's certainly teams where they could pick apart, right? If they imagine them throwing the ball to Dolson at the elbow with Coates posting up down low, and then you have action off the ball, pin down screen maybe for Quigley on the weak side to occupy defenders. There's a lot they could do. I think that as much as we're posing a lot of questions, I think the good news, if you're a Sky fan, is the fact that there are so many questions means that there are also a lot of possibilities, right? Like, even if it's for 10 minutes a game, they could run out Dolson and Coates and give some teams some problems if you have 3 shooters around them. Because remember, Dolson can also shoot 2. So essentially, you'd be surrounding Coates with 4 shooters. Now, do I think that would work maybe against a Sylvia Fowles or a Griner? No, but I think there are teams that could really give some problems.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask is, and it kind of boils back down to if we feel that Coates can be this type of player, but can she handle the one-on-one against, starting center in this league while you have those 4 shooters? Now, that's what it boils down to, I think, if you're going to run that. And like you said, I don't think she can handle Sylvia. I think there's a lot to be said as far as being able to be so dominant at the college level and coming into the W and kind of having a learning curve. And we saw that with Brittany Griner, and a lot of people don't say that. But when look at her stats when she goes up against top tier centers, she does not perform that well. She blows other centers out of the water, but she has that struggle going against top tier players. And that's a whole nother podcast. But for Coates, I mean, I think that's something to be said. Like she's going to need to have strength and power down low. And can she have that against a bigger player?
Right. And then again, why I'm saying there's questions is another solution they could do to their half court struggles. Like I said, they were 9th in the half court, 7th overall in offense, is just playing small ball, right? They were 2nd in transition offense. And I noticed they took a lot of mid-range shots, Breland, Young, but those players are gone now. So another direction they can go to is just put 5 shooters out there. Spread the floor, play 5 out. Dolson can be one of them because she can shoot the 3, and just really spread the floor. Let Vandersloot or Copper attack and draw 2 and kick the ball out. And depending on who they take in the draft, they can just add personnel that would help in that style of play. Someone who I think really, really will help this team, because you mentioned the draft, is Gabby Williams. Like I think she can solve a lot of these questions because she's kind of a tweener, right? I can see her. She's a player that is so athletic, can run the floor, will be great in transition, is a great passer. She'll be able to work well with the bigs and the guards. I can see her someone who can succeed as kind of a small forward with a lot of different styles. So I think maybe adding her will solve a lot of this. I see like Chicago has some upside in the paint. They have some upside in the backcourt. But I think really we've kind of the elephant in the room is the reason we're asking so much about how do the guards work with the bigs is because of deficiencies at the wing position that kind of make it all come together. Does that make sense?
I always find myself saying I couldn't agree more. I agree with you. I think there's, even on a different level, there's so many things that this team does that they have these really high highs and then they have these really low lows. For instance, the Sky, they blew out the Lynx last year. A lot of people don't remember that. I remember I was sitting at a train station in New Jersey watching the game on my phone thinking that like there must have been something wrong with the app, because the Sky were really struggling and they blew out the top talent in the league. This team has so much upside, but then they leave you scratching your head. And I think pointing at the wing position, as far as I've looked at it, and you've clearly looked at it, there's a lot of question marks there as far as I don't think that there's a defined direction of what they're trying to do in that position. And not saying that they need to make a free agent signing or whatnot, but just something to keep in mind is, I mean, you're looking at the salary cap of them. They got room to move. So like, don't put a move past them.
Well, yeah, they have a lot of salary cap. I mean, I think they just need to add athleticism at the wing, someone that can continue to space the floor. Gabby, again, I think Gabby Williams solves a lot of their problems because, like we said, they kind of have personnel they have talented personnel, but personnel that some of their personnel are really half-court oriented players. Some are really transition push players. They don't have a lot of great two-way players. I think that's a lot of their problem, even defensively. Like their backcourt struggle can be attacked one-on-one. Gabby Williams is someone who's a two-way player that can fit any style of play. Now, I honestly think Gabby Williams should be selected 2nd overall. I mean, hopefully she's there for Chicago. I think most of the draft boards have her going 3rd, with Asia Wilson going 1st, and then Indiana taking a guard because, like we talked about last week, Indiana kind of needs like a face of the franchise, which could be a Kelsey Mitchell or Diamond DeShields. But yeah, to me, Gabby Williams is the 2nd best prospect in the draft.
Well, let's talk about draft real quick. Let's put yourself in the shoes of coach and GM Amber Stocks. There was talk about it. We've chatted about it a lot in the podcast. You know, Bill Laimbeer possibly trying to do some trades with Chicago and whatnot. Forget what Bill's saying. If you're Amber Stocks, you're sitting there and you're looking at the roster they have now, what you've looked at the tape, the X's and O's from last year, looking forward, and how we know she wants to play that style of offense of pushing the pace, transition ball. Do you think that it's better in this specific draft to go for 2 top 5 picks versus the number 1?
I mean, I think Asia Wilson would be such a nice pick and roll partner to Vandersloot and Quigley, but I think overall this draft has so much talent. You got to take the 2 picks. I think if they can get Gabby Williams and then another elite guard, which they can, unless Indiana has a change of heart and takes Gabby Williams second. But if they can get Gabby Williams and DeShields or Gabby Williams and Kelsey Mitchell, or even I really like Lexi Brown out of Duke. I think it just gives them more upside. I don't think they're one piece away in terms of an Asia Wilson. I think they're 2 pieces away, 2 to 3. So I think having 2 is great. And then you still have a lot of trade ammo, right? Because you get two more elite prospects with Coates and Dolson, and I feel like there's a trade somewhere in there as well. And that's why I think, like, to some extent, there's a limit to how much we can analyze them because this roster is going to look so different in April.
Yeah.
What do you think, though? Would you consider, trying to make a play for the number 1 pick?
To me, hell no. Hell no. Because if it kind of boils down to what you're saying. I don't think that there's necessarily one player in this draft that jumps out and makes me say this player is going to make this team a championship contender. I think they're 1 to 3 players away. Now, you're basically saying, okay, is there one player that is one of those 1 to 3 players, or do we go for 2 top talents and then possibly fill 2 of those positions? If I'm the Sky, you have a good amount of vet presence on the roster. We talked about having open space on the cap. So, like, if they really wanted, and we've personally talked about Pondexter possibly coming back there just because of roster on Sparks and other teams doesn't necessarily make sense. But if I'm the Sky, I'm using that. I'm building, and I'm finding 2 players. I mean, this draft is so deep. I mean, imagine Gabby Williams on this team along with DeShields. Like, just for a couple seconds here, imagine that's the roster. You have the roster they got now, and then you add those 2 top talents. I think they make an immediate impact and take this team to a definite playoff team. Now, not necessarily, a championship contender, but somebody that once those players get some time under their belt, if they grow like a lot of people are expecting, they definitely can be putting this team on a championship competition caliber.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a lineup where you have Diamond DeShields, Courtney Vandersloot, Allie Quigley, Gabby Williams, and Stephanie Dolson. I mean, that team is going to be able to get out, run, shoot. Williams provides more athleticism defensively. I think DeShields, the thing is, like, with Vandersloot and Quigley, it limits what they can do defensively. Now you add some players that can actually provide some more ball pressure. And, the more I think about it, I would go to Coach, if I was Coach Stocks, I would go to her and say, you're going to be the anchor of our second unit. You're going to come out there. You're going to be the featured player. You're going to come out, play 15 to 25 minutes a game. We're going to throw you the ball, and we're going to play slow when you're out there. I feel like that's a way they could go. Really give Colts this kind of featured role in the second unit where she gets to go out there, get 6 to 8 post touches, get up her shots, slow the game down. But I think with our starting 5, I think they need to just get athletes, keep running. It was such a strength for them last year. And teams really had to think about that. Like, when you're game playing from Chicago, it's like, man, they have all these shooters. They push the ball. How do we contain them?
Well, that's a great point, because if you think about it, if you're standing there and you're saying Coates is the anchor of your second team, that's saying some good stuff as far as, like, the confidence you have in your first team. And I'm not saying, like, she's not good enough to be the starter. Again, I'm saying we have a lot of teams in this league, and the top teams in this league have proven this. You have players coming off the bench that have top talent and could be starters, but you're doing what's better for the team. And you've seen that trend kind of take over And I think you really see it morph and kind of control the mindset of a team. And that's the mindset you have if you're a champion.
Absolutely. And they can start them together. They could really take advantage of matchups too. They can mess around with other teams, right? If the other team goes small, then maybe you put in Coates and Dolson. Then if they go big, you sub them out really quickly and put in another shooter. And I feel like, again, even though there are, like we said, we're raising questions, but the positive is they can kind of, if they draft well, they can have the flexibility finally to really dictate tempo to other teams.
Yeah. I mean, the tempo is so key to their style of play. If you watch tape on them, when their tempo gets disrupted, that was the thing that kind of threw their wheel off course.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked a lot about the bigs, but then if you can add a DeShields or a Mitchell, that gives them just – I think some of their half-court problems too boil down to at the professional level when you're playing top defenses, sometimes you do need someone to just get you a bucket. And while Cappie Pondexter provided a little bit of that element, I mean, at this stage in her career, you can't rely on her to be your like number one scoring option in the half court. And I think, depending on which guard they take, they can potentially now have somebody who, hey, if we need a bucket in the half court and our sets aren't working, just get to the rim.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree. But so let's, every week we focus on a fan question. We pick it out. We reach out to the fans and we say, hey, shoot us some questions. I had a few that came in and a lot of them we covered. A lot of fans want to know the style of offense that they're running. And I think we said that there's a lot of question marks there because they have an ability to run multiple different styles, but they definitely like the fast pace and transition ball. So how they can get these athletes or these players to truly play that style of play is going to be the big question of 2018 for this team. Another question that's coming in from Charles A. Smith talked about the sky management and how that's doing it. So what my thought is, as far as the sky management is, if you're Amber Stocks or if you're the owner of the team and you have 2 picks in this draft, you got to think that it is a huge blow to the gut if you don't see a huge increase as far as last year to this year. So if to me, the management style, if they don't make good on these 2 picks or make a huge improvement, then Amber Stock's job is definitely in question. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Eli, I know you wanted to go over a few questions. Why don't you drop the questions and give a shout out to who asked them?
Well, I want to weigh in too on Charles Smith. I mean, I don't know. I'll actually disagree with you on that one. I don't think her job's, it's her second year. And last year they had complete roster overhaul. It was their first year without Elena Delle Donne. I think what Charles Smith was getting is, what do you make of the management in terms of, and I think we got to weigh in because you've always said your mission is to just keep it real. I mean, he asked, like, what do you make of the management? And I think, whether it be Fowles or Boyette or Delle Donne, for various reasons, kind of they've traded a lot of stars. And I will say, to their credit, they have done well at getting good return on the trades. I thought in the Elena Delle Donne trade, to come away with the number 2 pick in the draft and Dolson, I mean, that's as good as a package as you're going to get when you had no leverage. I mean, she said, I'm going to sit out the season if you don't trade me. Then to get essentially, to get Dolson and the number 2 pick, in addition to, they got some other stuff as well, but that was the headline. I mean, they did very well in the trade. And I thought to get a first-round pick for Imani, at the time, a lot of people, I think, said, oh, Atlanta won the trade. I think Chicago won that trade now that we've had time to let it sit. I just think whoever they take with that extra pick they got is just the upside of a Diamond DeShields or a Kelsey Mitchell, I think is just higher overall.
Well, it could legitimately change their team.
Right. Like, I think Imani Boyette is a good player who can help Atlanta? Yes. But would I rather have a lottery pick to be honest, I think Chicago won that trade as an analyst. So I'm giving management some credit. I don't know who's ultimately constructing the trades. What was it when it was Pokey and now Amber versus how involved ownership is when it comes to making those deals. So again, giving credit where credit's due, they have netted good return in these trades. But I think some fans are wondering, why are they trading these players in the first place? I mean, you had Elena Delle Donne, who is, arguably just on paper, the best player in the WNBA, just in terms of tools. I'm not saying she is the best player. Sylvia Fowles won the MVP, and there's a lot of other talents, but there's no player in the WNBA, maybe other than Candace Parker, that's as versatile in terms of a star. So I think what's your take there? Because I think Charles Smith does raise a fair question just about management and trades and kind of all this turnover we've seen in the last few years.
Again, there's been a lot of turnover, and even before the Elena Delle Donne, I mean, if you look at their roster of when they went to the finals, it was absurd. They had Sylvia, they had Elena Delle Donne, they had a few players who moved on to LA, to New York. I mean, the roster was ridiculous. And the fact that you can't make it work with that, I think you can make excuses and you can say, oh, well, just because you have so much talent doesn't mean that it's going to work so well. But I agree with you. There's a huge question mark as far as when you have that many athletes who are saying, we want out of here. Now, I think there's an element of it that has to do with the fact that, they're not directly associated with an NBA team, so they don't necessarily have all the same style of facilities and medical things that other teams have. That's changed, thank God, due to new partnerships they just recently signed. But there's definitely been some questions as far as the management's ability to put the players and to really put out a product that can win a championship and to fully back it. And it starts with, and I'm not pointing fingers, but I think this starts with everything. It starts at the top and it works its way down. So it starts with the owner, and then it goes to the president of operations, and then the GM and the head coach, and then the assistant coaches and the trainers, and that's going to shape the mentality of the players. And I think you see it in some teams. I know we've spoken about it. I see that a lot in the Lynx, and I see the mindset in Connecticut had changed. You've told me how you see that in LA. We're starting to see that in Atlanta with, the Connecticut offspring, or, Coach Nikki going down there and kind of taking that same mentality. I think that's really the biggest question is can this team and the management get together and figure out a way moving forward that they have one mission, and that mission needs to be a championship and working together towards that goal.
Yeah, and like I remember Fowles on the Around the Rim podcast with LaChina Robinson definitely had said, like, she, in a politically correct way, she had kind of said when she got to Minnesota, she just saw like an organizational synergy she hadn't seen before. And again, like I said, I'm not so pessimistic because they've done well in trades, but I mean, this team could have Elena Delle Donne and Fowles right now. You know what I mean? And for as much as we want to talk about Coates and Dolson, I think anyone in the world would take Delle Donne and Fowles over whatever they have now, right? So
hell yeah.
It just seems like, I don't know, there's a story there on Delle Donne that maybe will never get fully told. I hope it does. I hope, maybe, hey, if you're listening, if anyone out there is listening, we'd love to have you on the podcast to really get to the bottom of it. But I just feel like every last shred of possibility should have been tried or to keep her on the team. It's a generational talent that was lost, unfortunately.
Yeah, and when you lose that, especially because it's one thing if, they drafted her and then there was some issues and she left after one season or so, but the fan base was just teased with having that generational talent with them for a few years, and then to just be ripped away. And I know she loved the fan base. So, and the fan base loved her. And it's got to be tough if you're a Chicago Sky fan to constantly see such amazing, generational talents go through and then continue to excel. And it's not like, the Herschel Walker trade where one team goes, oh yeah, this is kind of this person's not getting any better. They're only going down from here. It's, EDD still has a lot left in the tank. Sylvia Fowles still has a lot left in the tank.
The Sky Show Shy at the Sky Show Shy asked 2 questions. One, she asked, what should the Sky do with the picks? I think we addressed that. We like Gabby Williams and then the best guard available. And I'm counting DeShields kind of as a guard. She's a little bit – she could play the wing, but she's a ball handler. So I think DeShields and Williams would be my targets. But if they're off the board, I personally like Lexi Brown, Kelsey Mitchell. And then what style of play should this core of Sloot, Quiggs, Dolson develop into? She asked, should it be 3-point shooting from all positions with Sloot handling the ball? I think so. I think they were second in transition. I think that style forces other teams to game plan for them. And then I think you have Coates kind of anchor the second unit that brings a little bit of a different look. And then when they play some of the bigger teams, at least now they can play 2 bigs, against Minnesota and whatnot when they need to. But I think their overall best strategy. We kind of already answered that, but I did want to give a shout out for asking the questions. Do you got anything else on that? Wow. I mean, we definitely went long on Chicago, but I think we've just said, like, man, if there's one team that just has so many questions, this was the team we knew we would just like, there's so much more we haven't even hit on, but it's just, I think this for me is the team with the most questions in the WNBA right now.
And again, when we say questions, folks, we're not saying that in a negative way. A lot of times people try and sugarcoat their wording, and when they say, oh, there's a lot of questions as to if that person can do. No, we're saying, like, we'll call it out. If we think you're crap, you're crap. But we're saying is this team has so much skill on the roster and so much ability. There's questions as how you can use that ability to put the best product out there, to put up the most points, to play the best defense. And there's just so many possibilities with this team. That's great. Thanks, Sky Show, for that one. We've chatted with you online many times. So moving on to the LA Sparks, the second team we're going to cover. Now, as everybody knows, WNBA fans are no newbies to the LA Sparks. They're a team that struggled for a while, couldn't make a real push in the playoffs, but with top talent of Candace Parker and others. But then 2 years ago, finally make that jump. They're able, with the new playoff format, they're able to make it to the finals. They take on the Minnesota Lynx. They go to Game 5 and they win. All right. They have some turnover. They come into the season. They're trying to work in the new players that they have on their team. They're trying to make, the new lineups work. They struggle early on, but at the second half of the season, they just hit a gear that even the Lynx and no other team in the league was on, looking beyond scary. And to me, the elephant in the room, the question is, your team in many ways got better than it was when you won the finals. You went to Game 5 again. Now, obviously, you can argue, okay, we were one play or we were one quarter or one drive away from winning that game. We were one game away. But I think you have to ask yourself, the team got better after a championship win, and then you lose the following year. What can you do? What's your next step coming into this season?
Well, I don't think they really need to do too much. I mean, they were one game away from winning back-to-back titles. They were right there with Minnesota. I think they were, second in offensive and defensive rating. They were first in offense in terms of points per possession. So it was 2 5-game series, and I think they're right there. Like there's a clear top 2 in the WNBA, and I expect those teams to meet again for part 3. And so the short answer is they just need to keep playing.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I still think that as a whole, it definitely raises questions to me in my mind. I mean, yeah, all right, you take the 2 series and we're tied 5-5. That's great. To me, can we figure out a way that you can start making some more three balls? We saw, I mean, in some ways, do you think I know you talked to Cheryl about this after the game about how many threes that that the Lynx just let the Sparks have. Do you think that that's something moving forward that they try and shore up? And I know they have 3-point shooters, but they just shot abysmal in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, I asked Coach Reeve after game 3 in the finals, game 4, if it was actually their strategy, because the Sparks went really cold from the perimeter, and I think ultimately it was the rebounding of Minnesota and the lack of 3-point shooting from LA that kind of tipped that series to Minnesota. She said they would never just allow open shots, was what she told me. So I can't sit here and say that was a strategy in Minnesota, but it definitely felt like a weakness. I think, they were 5th in percentage last year, so it's not like they were last in the league and it's like a huge hole. But I think when you go up against Minnesota, that's the thing. Like, the size LA has starting Nneka and Candace is somewhat neutralized against Minnesota with Brunson and Fowles. And so I think the advantage LA actually has in that matchup specifically is getting out in transition and shooting and trying to force Brunson and Fowles to guard the perimeter. And I think ultimately, like, Chelsea Gray led the league in 3-point shooting, but they're kind of inconsistent after that, right? Candace can knock it down, but it may not be her top asset in her game. Nneka and Beard are definitely more comfortable from the mid-range than from 3. Odyssey Sims is not a great 3-point shooter. She did get hot in the playoffs and hit some really big threes, but overall, mechanically and just her overall percentage for the year, that's definitely not her game. So I do think, like, they're a team that in that matchup, Minnesota can kind of pack it in to try to, stop Sims from getting to the rim and stop some of the post game. And I don't know if they have. I think that is a legitimate weakness to call out of, is there enough 3-point shooting to make Minnesota pay for kind of packing in the paint and crashing the glass on them?
Well, that was something that we saw both teams talk about after the I'll call it round 1, the first finals series that they faced off. And the Lynx moving forward after losing that series said, we need to start hitting more 3-point shots if we want to compete with them. And then you saw the next year, the Lynx had a better 3-point shooting percentage than they did the year before, but also they beat the Sparks with using the 3-point ball as a weakness of the Sparks, but also as a strength of the Minnesota Lynx. If I'm standing there and I'm thinking to myself, what can we do to do better? I saw a lot of times, we talk about this. Obviously, the Sparks and the Lynx are not saying, all right, we're building our team just to play each other, because you have 10 other teams in the league that you need to be prepared for because they are getting better day in and day out. But I will say, if I'm the Sparks, we've been having this debate since last season. If I'm the Sparks, you need to start using your bench players more. They have talent, and if you don't give them minutes and then you bring them in when you finally have a deep playoff series and you bring them in for a couple minutes and they mess up and you don't have that confidence and you pull them, that doesn't give the benefit of having skilled bench players to your starters.
Yeah, one player I'm really hoping plays a bigger role this year is Sydney Weiss. She shot 40% at Oregon State in 3 seasons from 3. And being live at the Staples Center last year for the playoffs, I watched her in warm-ups, and I mean, she's a lights-out shooter. And she has, I'm sure defensively, maybe there's some question marks, which limited her playing time and the trust to put her out there in the playoffs. But she's got some height. I feel like she's somebody who can get her shot off against a lot of guards. And just all the attention that Chelsea Gray and Odyssey Sims and Candace Parker and Nneka draw, I feel like they definitely could get her open. Agler is one of the best in terms of drawing up sets. And I think she kind of, like we've said, the Sparks don't have a lot of salary cap room. I don't see them adding somebody, other than a rookie, which may not get much minutes regardless. I think she's the one person when I look up and down their roster who can give them that dynamic that they're missing.
Yeah, I agree. Every time I think of her, I think of that first game where she kind of said, "Hey, I'm in the WNBA," and she dropped I think she hit like 3 threes in a row, or she dropped 12 points. It was something crazy where she was just could not miss. I mean, I was expecting her to do a heat check, and I don't think she ever got checked on it. But I'm looking at something that kind of brings question to this. You have NECA who can shoot. You have Candace who can shoot. But something that was a huge weakness for this team when you're talking finals and just in general, when this team failed, it was always associated in my mind with a lack of offensive rebounds.
Fair enough. The thing is, as a coach, offensive rebounding is something that really is it's a philosophy thing. And I asked Agler about it in the finals. Some teams choose to crash the boards. Some teams prefer to get back in transition because think about it for kind of the casual fan who might be listening to this. If you send 3 or 4 players, if you put up a shot, okay, so I'll walk it through. Let's say Chelsea Gray puts up a shot. If you send NECA, Candace, Elena Beard to the offensive glass, if you don't get the rebound, that means that you have 3 players under the basket and the other team can just push the ball down the court and get into their transition game. So a lot of coaches actually prefer to just tell everyone to get back on defense. Get back on D, set up our defense. We're going to prevent the other team from getting in transition. So I think it really is a philosophical thing that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. So I'm just bringing that up to say that them not getting offensive rebounds could be more a function of style than inability, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then again, this is a debate that we often have because to me, at a certain point, though, when these other teams are they're getting to me, it's just you're missing out on points when you have, NECA and Candace, 2 players that can dominate, but it's kind of like with NECA, I see it very much so that you have a player who's so skilled and versatile. How are you going to use her when you're playing against these other players? So something that I think we should be looking at as far as how the Sparks can win the championship next year. I don't want to, kind of hearing what you're saying, I don't want to start saying get over the hump or play better because they were playing top level basketball. So to win the finals next year, I think something that we got to start talking about is Elena Beard was a liability on offense at times. And back to using the bench. If you have someone, we all know that she is a top tier defender. I mean, she won the award last year. She is arguably the best defender in the league. She shut down Maya Moore a few times in mind-blowing fashion. My thought is start using her on the bench. Start her, pull her real quick, get her on the bench. What do you think about that? I mean, using some different lineups as far as this team. I know you heavily focused on this team last year, and you spoke slightly about getting Raquana Williams out there a little bit more also.
Yeah. Well, just to close out on the rebounding, my opinion is that the issue, they were 11th in offensive rebounds. So I really think looking at that, reading between the lines, they're not trying to get many offensive rebounds. I think they'd probably say, okay, NECA, if you can grab it, great, but we just want to get back on D. I think the bigger issue against Minnesota is giving up offensive rebounds. You know what I mean? They don't need to get a ton. They need to prevent Minnesota from doing that. But to your question, I know we kind of debated this last year, and I know you felt Agler should have been playing more players and a bigger rotation. I think it's hard, in his defense, it's hard when you're in a win-now mode. This team their title window is now, and they have 5 really quality starters, and it's hard to play. When you trust all 5 starters, it's kind of hard when you're trying to win titles now. To put someone out there that you're just not sure about. Now, where I would agree with you is I think in the regular season, they need to play Weiss and other players more just to see what they have so that when they get to the finals, when they get to the playoffs, they know kind of what they have. Now, Raquana Williams, she was injured a lot. So to be fair, maybe she just wasn't 100%, or maybe because she missed so much time when they were going on that run, maybe Agler felt like, maybe she didn't fit into what they had been doing in the second half of the season. One thing I think I would like to see against Minnesota is maybe staggering the minutes a bit more, so that I feel like there's a world where 4 of the 5 starters can always be out there. So rather than bringing in Carson and Lavender together, or Carson, Lavender, and Williams, maybe you sub out Elena Beard early, or you sub out Sims early. And so you always, if you can have 4 of the 5 starters always on the court, so maybe you have Lavender, Williams, and Carson, you have them playing one at a time with 4 starters. Maybe there's something they can play. I think they can play with the rotations. But like we said, from a cap situation, I don't see them getting anybody that's going to play a huge role, other than it being Weiss or somebody they already have kind of stepping up in the regular season and proving to the coaching staff that they deserve a role in the playoffs.
If Candace Parker, I just have this vision of Candace Parker driving to the paint, just basically pulling the whole defense in on her and then kicking out to Weiss. And it's just lights out, bing, 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 and they're up by 20. And it could happen so quick. It just takes a little bit of confidence in the young player.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a fair criticism. No coach is perfect. And I think if there's something you want to point to, that is, I'm not going to say, I would agree that's a fair criticism. I would just say that, the Sparks won a championship, and I think Agler is a top 2 coach in the league and one of the best coaches, in basketball, period, not just women's basketball. So I guess I give them the benefit of the doubt, but I think it is fair. They definitely lacked. They needed one more guard last year. I think it was just clear to me they needed one more guard. And again, if you want to defend them, you could say Raquana Williams was hurt. She never really got back to that level, and she would have been that guard, but I didn't really see it. I don't know. There's something about her game that doesn't quite fit. She takes a lot of ill-advised shots defensively. She definitely can pressure the ball, and I thought she gave some quality minutes defensively. But I still think even with her healthy, they just lack one more guard, and maybe that's Weiss, maybe that's a rookie. I think there is a lot of depth at the guard position in this draft. So that's another thing. Even though they don't have a top pick, maybe that guard is sitting there for them at the end of the first round.
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you. Is that where you see this team going for a guard pick? I mean, at a certain point, I find it hard. The Lynx have a similar problem. A lot of teams have these problems when you have a star like Candace Parker or whatever. Obviously, she's got some more years left in her. But at a certain point, do you think it's too early to start saying, okay, you need to start grooming someone to come in behind her?
I think they need to pick someone who's going to help them as soon as possible. They're in a win-now mode. They should get back to the finals this year. They have the 11th pick in the draft. It's tough. You kind of just have to take the best available at that point. Now, like I said, right now in some mock drafts, you see Jordan Canada and Lexi Brown, 2 really good guards out of UCLA and Duke. But I don't know if they'll still be available at 11. It's going to be tough. I think they might be off the table at that point. So I think they're a bit their hands are tied because they don't picking 11th. They're just not. They're gonna maybe just have to take who's left at that point. I feel like this draft is really strong, 1 to 9, 1 to 10, and then it drops off a little bit. They don't have the cap room unless someone like Happy Pondexter says, "Hey, I'm willing to play for the veteran minimum because I want to live in LA and I want to help you." So I think barring that, they're just gonna have to really hope Weiss is good enough defensively to earn some more minutes. And hey, at the end of the day, they're a few possessions away from back-to-back titles. So we also have to take a step back and say we are nitpicking a bit.
Oh, yeah. When you're at the top teams, I think you got to nitpick. So I'm looking at a few fan questions, and one of them just kind of popped out at me from Jake DeBacher. Jake DeBacher. With the lack of cap room and recent success that this team has had, is this team set? Now, I think that's a really interesting question because looking at this roster, I mean, if I'm a Sparks fan and I'm looking at it, I'm thinking to myself, Raquana Williams, Jantel Lavender, NECA, and Candace Parker basically have the whole cap. Now, if you're not playing, I mean, you follow this team, it's in your backyard. Are Raquana and Jantel locks for the team, or are they possibilities on a draft day trade to try and move up a little bit and kind of free up some cap room so you could sign somebody, maybe like Tiffany Jackson Jones, who would be really hard to do without doing something, or you get a good player in this draft that they're sold on.
Right, because looking at their cap sheet, they have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 10 players on the books now for 2018. And while we don't officially have the numbers yet on Beard and Sims, if we're assuming they're close to the max, I mean, they basically have room. I mean, they need to get 2 players. One of them is going to be that 11th pick. I just don't see. There's no one they can add. I ultimately feel like they'll just have to sign their picks, their 11th pick, and then in the second round, their 23rd pick to make the money work. Who would they really get? Like I hear what you're saying of like try to be creative, try to make a trade, but I mean, I just don't see any of those players having much value to another team.
I don't know. Look at somebody like I could definitely see Raquana Williams or Jantel. All right. Not with the current moves, but like before the free agency moves, I wouldn't have been surprised, a little trade and sign or something like that with Las Vegas. A player, I think.
Well, Jantel Lavender's signed through 2020, so
yeah.
I mean, I just don't. What a team, that's a lot of money to put on your books.
Yeah.
For another team, she's getting max money and is signed for 3 more years. So to trade her, you'd have to take back somebody. You'd have to absorb equal salary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just feel like I like for another team to take on max money like that for someone who comes off the bench. That's what I'm saying. It's not that. Let me be very clear. It's not that those players aren't talented players. I'm just saying from a book standpoint, I don't see the upside for another team to take on that much money for someone who's playing a backup role right now.
Oh yeah.
And I think they need her because NECA and Candace get into foul trouble, and I mean, she's a legitimate third big. I think they need to keep her.
I mean, a real thought for the Sparks, and we're kind of wrapping up here now, folks, but a real thought for the Sparks is, I think it needs to be said, and obviously you might disagree, they need to entertain that idea of possibly making some moves because, again, I mean, we don't know the contract of Odyssey Sims or Elena Beard, but just looking at the books right now, even with them, even like not knowing how much their roster is going to affect the cap, they barely have any room to sign anybody.
Right. And just Raquana Williams is also making basically max money. So I see her as immovable because you're not. Who's going to trade for a max player that hasn't been healthy? I mean, so again, look, the Sparks doubled.
But she's a 1-year contract, so that makes it a little bit different than Jantel.
Oh yeah, that's true. That does make it attractive because that means it would be coming off your books. Yeah, I mean, at the trade deadline, she could be an interesting piece if a team wants to kind of take a flyer on her, knowing she'll come off the books. But I don't know. Looking at their cap sheet, I think they basically have, 7 to 8 max players that they feel are good enough to make them win the title. And I think they just need to draft really strategically here and see if they can, get somebody that's going to help them.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, especially it's tough for the teams that do really well because, and again, this is, you're crying. You just were in the finals 2 years in a row. But it is tough to stay up there because you have such a talented roster and you're getting late picks and, it's hard to get minutes for those other players. So if I'm the LA Sparks and the Minnesota Lynx, I'm thinking of, okay, what can we do with what we have with spending the least money? Kind of getting crafty with what you got there as far as making moves to make your team better and far better than the rest of the teams. So, Eli, it's been great having you on this week. We got to dive deep into the LA Sparks and the Chicago Sky. The Sky, a team that, I mean, you and I were texting all week chatting about them just because there's so many avenues that they could go into and breakaways and this and that. And we see a lot of upside for them. The question is, again, the draft. And from the draft, are we going to get an idea of the style of offense and what they want to do as far as how they're going to handle all the talent that they have? Eli, any closing thoughts for the fans of the Sky or the LA Sparks?
No, I mean, I think this was great stuff. We really went deep on the Sky, a lot to think about for them. I think the Sparks, I expect them back to the finals and to be right there with Minnesota. Maybe even have to give them a little bit of an edge with the Lynx losing Montgomery. So I'm excited, being out here in LA I'll get to see them a lot live. And yeah, I mean, great stuff. Any final words on your end?
No, I was just going to tell the people, make sure to tell your friends, subscribe. We got some important and exciting news coming forward. I know I've teased it a little bit. My first game, we got some more information coming shortly. And follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, Instagram. But thanks for listening and have a great day. Eli Horowitz, why don't you real quickly remind the folks, what's your handle?
I'm at Coach Horowitz 13. That's at Coach HOROWITZ 13. And definitely, follow both of us, subscribe. I mean, a little bit goes a long way. Like, we're trying to cover this league independently and provide the fans the coverage that's lacking from mainstream media sites. And the more support we get, the more we're able to do.
I love it. All right, folks, that's it for the WNBA Insider Podcast. Again, it's Aryeh Schwartz along with Eli Horowitz. We're breaking down teams, diving deep, and we'll see you next week, guys.